All right. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to another live webinar networking event here on the 17th floor. As a reminder, the 17th floor is an online community focused on the growing practice of human capital management, which gathers HR, accounting, and payroll professionals together for peer-to-peer engagement, education, and mentorship. Every month, the 17th floor hosts a live networking chat featuring special industry guests, and it gives us an opportunity to chat about our experiences and learn how to uplift businesses by elevating the well-being of employees. My name is Cynthia Spitz, and I'm a member of the 17th floor and the HR and operations manager at Sensei Marketing. And today, I have the great pleasure of moderating this 17th floor discussion, how to support your employees' mental health. And I'm delighted to be joined by today's expert, Beverly Beuermann-King, to discuss this topic. Beverly is an extremely impressive and inspiring human being. And just to tell our audience a little bit about who you are, for 20 years, Beverly has used her SOS principle with teams who want to control their reactions to stress, build resiliency against life's challenges, and live more fulfilling lives. Beverly works with teams and leaders to shift from stressed to resilient, enabling them to become more engaged, productive, and healthy in their workplaces and in their lives. So, hello to all of those tuning in. It's great to have you all here. And hi, Beverly. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm really grateful to have you here with us. And I'm sure all of the members of our audience are looking forward to hearing all of the insights that you have to share on this tremendously important and topical subject matter. So, just one last thing before we start our discussion. So, today we're going to hear from Beverly, of course, but we also want you as the audience to get involved and ask some questions as well. So, we've got the live chat function open throughout the webinar, and we really encourage you to, as our audience members, use that chat function to ask Beverly some of your questions or send some comments throughout this whole session. And for those of you who are watching the replay of this discussion, you can find Beverly's contact information below the video or visit the 17th floor forum to ask further questions and engage with your peers. So, without further ado, I'll welcome Beverly and just let you know that last week we posed a question to some of the members of our 17th floor, well, all of the members of our 17th floor, to share some of your challenges or questions for Beverly on how to best support your employees' mental health. And we've gotten back some really great responses for Beverly to speak to. And just before I jump into some of those really thoughtful questions that our members have asked, Beverly, can you share a little bit about your trademark SOS principle that you've created?
Okay. So SOS for me stands for situation, ourself, and support. And so I've been doing these presentations and I've been talking about mental health and resiliency for a number of years. And when I was working with the Canadian Mental Health Association, I was looking for a way of helping people to figure out how to put strategies into place because, as you know, there are so many different ways of being able to manage your stress and build your resiliency. And when we listen to things like media and news reports, one day you hear, we should take vitamin E, and the next day we should all be doing yoga, and it gets very confusing to figure out. From my research and my background and all of this other stuff, there are really three main buckets when it comes to your tools to build your resiliency and manage your stress. And so situation, ourself, and support represent those three buckets. What am I going to do about the thing or things that are causing my stress? How am I going to take care of myself during this really stressful time? And who's there to support me? So what am I going to do about it? How am I going to take care of myself? Who's there to support me? And so all of the tools fit into those three buckets, and we need strategies from each of those buckets in order to be at our very best and to be as resilient as we need to be as we manage the change and challenges and chaos that we're going through.
Thank you so much. What an incredible and succinct way to put such a big topic. It's there's so much there to dive into.
There
Within
is.
the Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say there is. And so that's part of the thing. So, the situation is, how do we break it down? How do we problem solve it? The O is, how do we make sure that we are in a healthy place, both physically and mentally? So all the basics: eating right, sleeping right, exercise. And then who's there for support? Who can we talk to? Who can we vent to? Who's been there? Who's done that? Who can help us maybe answer our questions that we have as we go through this?
Yeah, it's so important to have this support network and to use this support network, so we can't go
Mhm.
through life alone. So within your SOS principle and a lot of your teachings, you talk about resiliency and how resiliency can be learned. Can you tell us how we can go about learning and cultivating resilience?
So first of all, resilience for me is, that those little wee super balls that you used to play with on the playground when you were in public school, the kind you'd throw up against the brick wall and then they'd go all over
Yeah.
the place and you'd chase them for the rest of the recess. For me, that's what resiliency is like. It's about being able to go through the changes and challenges, and it's about taking that energy and moving forward. Now, we may not be on the same path that we thought we were going to be on, but it allows us to be able to take that energy and move forward. And so resiliency for me is being able to bounce. It's being able to get through the challenges, but it's not just to get through the pandemic. It's not just to get through the changes that are taking place in our workplace. It really is about being able to do these on an ongoing basis that allow us to be able to live a full and fulfilling life, and to be able to flourish through all of the changes and challenges that we're going to go through. So we're going to use certain skills in some situations, we're going to use certain skills in another another type of situation, but resiliency allows us to be able to adapt and utilize all of the tools in our tool belt to be able to move forward.
It's funny, you talked about building this groundedness, this sense of centeredness, and one of our members actually asked the question. Stacy asked the question, "What tips and practices would you suggest to establish good sleep habits?" And I know you already touched on how sleep is so important. Could you answer that a little bit for Stacy?
Sleep is hugely important, and again, because we know not only for our mental well-being and our physical well-being, but even just for our outlook on life. And so for me, it really is about putting into place the practices that are going to allow you to get a good night's sleep. And so what are the bedtime routines that you need to do for yourself? Maybe it is doing, some stretching before bed, or doing some meditation. Maybe it's turning the TV off or turning your phone off, an hour ahead of time. It's a practice of finding the right strategies that then become part of that bedtime routine. And we do that for, our little ones at home, right? We know that they have to have a bedtime routine in order to be able to get a good night's sleep. And so some of us, we don't need that bedtime routine. We can fall asleep anywhere, anytime, any, train going through the bedroom, and we're okay. Others of us have to make sure that we're following a bedtime routine. The other thing is, maybe you need to learn how to nap. I know when my boys were little, I would spend all day working. They would come home from school and they were in high level hockey. And so then we would be on the road all evening. And so for me, it was really important that I took a nap in between those two times before they came home from school, in order to have the energy and not be fatigued when I was driving home late at night. Some people say, "Oh, I can't nap," but there's an art to napping, in the same way that there's an art to having a good bedtime routine. And so 20 minutes or less, or a full 90-minute sleep cycle, but finding the way that's going to be best for you. I think making sure that you get enough quality and quantity sleep, and being able to adapt and change that as sometimes things changes. As we hit menopause, things change. As we go through stressful times at work, things are going to change. You're not going to get the same kind of quality of sleep, but being able to adjust it slightly, being able to work with it slightly, being able to keep it as a priority on your priority list, so that it doesn't get shoved later and later, or we get up earlier and earlier trying to get more things done.
So there is no one size fits all approach for any individual, or for any individual throughout their lifespan.
Not for any of these tools, right? I think, and that's the big part. Even how we experience stress is very different from person to person. The same with our, when we talk about we talk about the illness of depression, even that is experienced as different and by person to person. So you can't say that there's a one size fit all for strategies, or even for treatments for some of these things.
Of course. course, it's about finding what works for you, the individual. And you speak about depression, and it's a good way to start talking about breaking the silence on mental illness within this conversation. And the sad truth is there's been progress in mental health education, but there's still a massive amount of stigma surrounding mental health in the workplace. And it can be extremely difficult for opening up that dialogue, and people are afraid. They don't want to say the wrong thing, so they often say nothing. And unfortunately, this leads to countless individuals suffering in silence. And of course, this happens for many reasons. So I have kind of a two-parter question for you on this. And the first part is, I'm hoping you can speak to why wouldn't somebody reach out for help? And to add to this, I've got a great question from Lisa on this subject. If somebody does reach out for help or seems as though they're having a hard time, Lisa has asked, what is the best way to support a coworker who is struggling with changes or difficulties in their personal life? Is it best to just leave them be and leave them alone when they're visibly upset, or to check on them and ask them questions? So why wouldn't somebody reach out for help, and what's the best way to support somebody who does reach out for help?
Perfect. Let's start with the first one. Why wouldn't somebody reach out for help? There's so many reasons. I think, the shame and the stigma behind it. What if I open up that I'm struggling? Will people think that I can't handle it? Will they stop coming to me for help? Will they ostracize me in some sort of way? Will I not be considered for that promotion anymore? So I think there's, that shame and stigma. Sometimes it's, that the shame that maybe they'll bring onto their family, because we talk about different cultures as well. So in some cultures, that's considered to be definitely stigmatizing and shameful, and you keep it a secret, and you don't talk about it. Not even, some people don't reach out for help because they don't know. They don't know that what they're experiencing is actually part of a mental health issue. They feel like it's just who they are. They've always been this way. They don't realize that other people don't experience the world in the same way that they are, that gray and that darkness and that gloom is not what everybody else is experiencing. And then not knowing how to bring it up. What if I bring it up and all of a sudden I'm locked up in an institution in a straitjacket? Like, we have all of the kind of the media mentality that comes from it as well. So I think there's a number of reasons. The other thing is, where do I go for help and who do I talk to? We think about, talking to our HR, but when our studies show that we're not likely to talk to our HR or our colleagues. We're not likely to talk to our family members. We might talk to a friend. We might talk to a spiritual advisor. We might talk to our doctor, but who do I go to? And if I do decide to go to talk to somebody, where do I even start? Like, in the GTA area, the Greater Toronto area, there's all kinds of resources, but there's also requirements, and there's wait times. And if you live on this side of Yonge and not that side of Yonge, and if you're this old and not that old, being able to access those resources. But if you live north of Kapuskasing in Northern Ontario, it may take you 2 to 3 hours to get to your general practitioner, let alone somebody who specializes in mental health issues. So all of those can be barriers for why people don't reach out. I love the second question. So what do we do? Should we, leave them alone? Should we let them, figure it out on their own? Or would I seem nosy if I kind of ask the questions? And my big take on this is, it's better to reach out and ask and have that person say, no, everything's fine. Things are going okay. Than to have somebody who is really struggling feel like nobody cares, or that they're in it by themselves, or they can't, they have nobody to talk to. So I use a model, and that model is called ALEC. And now, Cynthia, have you taken a mental health first aid course before?
I have not in my workplace, but I have elsewhere.
Okay. So in a mental health first aid course, they often use a model called ALGE. Now, I never remember what ALGE stands for. And for me, algae is icky. It's kind of that green stuff that floats on ponds. So I actually go for a simpler model, which is called ALEC. To me, ALEC is a person that I'm talking to, and it stands for ask, listen, encourage, and check in. And it's just a simple way of being able to kind of formulate your thoughts, to be able to approach a conversation that with the goal of helping that person to find the right strategies, to find the right supports, to be able to take some sort of action. The A, Do we have time to go through all of them?
Please.
All right. So A stands for ask. And so if I was concerned that maybe you were dealing with something, part of that ask is being able to identify what have I noticed that's different in your behavior or in your attitude or in the way that you're speaking, because that's usually the first thing that happens, is that there's something that twigs for us. There might be something in the pit of our stomach or the hairs on the back of our neck that say something's just not quite right. And so we want to address that. We might want to say, hey, Cynthia, you haven't seemed like yourself lately. You haven't been joking around like you normally do. So we identify what we've noticed different. And then we ask, what's been really hard for you lately, or what's been going on? We want to stay away from how are you? Because, when we say, how are you? It's far too easy to say fine. And, fine can mean anything. Fine can mean, hey, I don't want to talk about it right now. Fine can mean, I don't know how I'm feeling, or it's a standard answer that will get you, kind of to step away. So we want to ask questions that open up the conversation. How have things been going? What's been really easy to deal with? What's been really hard to deal with? What's been, the biggest struggle lately? How have you been feeling about those things? So we're asking. The listener is listening to not only what the person says, but what do they not say? What is the emotion behind what they're saying? And we've seen that, right? Where somebody says fine, but everything about their body language is saying everything but fine.
Yeah.
And so we want to listen, and we want to listen to what they say, how they say it. We want to ask questions. How have they dealt with this before? How long have they been feeling this way? What has been really helpful? What's not been helpful? And so we want to clarify as we're listening to kind of the information that we're receiving. And then the E is encourage. Encourage them to take some sort of action. Now that might be encourage them to talk to their doctor, to their HR. It might be talking to their EAP, your employee assistance program, which is confidential. It might be reaching out to, their family to talk about it, a spiritual advisor. It might be a cultural advisor in some sort of way. But to take some sort of action. It's also about encouraging, them, to let them know that they're not in it alone, that you, as maybe a colleague or as a supervisor or as a friend, you may be able to support them. What can I do to help you right now? It's not about you becoming their psychologist or their therapist. It's not about you knowing all of the details of everything, but it is about helping them to take action and to step forward. And then the C is check in. Sometimes I think we think this is a one and done conversation, like we had the conversation, or we're afraid to check in because they might feel like we're being nosy. But it doesn't have to be a conversation around this again. It might be, hey, if they were a Blue Jays fan, it's checking in on, how the Blue Jays did. Or if you talk to them about, a project at work, continue to do that. But it's also about, hey, you said you were going to go see your doctor. How did that go? Again, you don't need the details, but is there anything else that I can do to support you? Or did you find that really difficult? Again, checking in and keeping that conversation going. So ask, listen, encourage, and check in.
So asking, how are you really doing, and asking that, getting that answer by using these different techniques instead of just, hey, how you doing? And starting the dialogue from there. And I think the check-in is really smart, and whether or not it pertains to what's been shared, it's important so that people feel like they have allies and, hey, I'm here and you're not alone. Because as we've said, it's so isolating, and having that accountability of did you do the thing is such a great thing for you to share. So I hope people really do take that into account. That's some really, really great model, the ALEC model. I love that. Thank you.
I put a document together on my LinkedIn page. And so for any of you that you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, absolutely. But in the document section is actually a document that is what not to say. And I think, part of it is we know not to say these things, but we don't know what to say instead of. And so this document gives you kind of both of those. And so you can download it, you can use it, you can keep it on your desk or whatever you would like, but it's just a quick kind of flip book of what not to say.
That's great. That's a really great resource. Thank you for sharing that. And I hope everyone goes to Beverly's LinkedIn profile and downloads that and utilizes it. It's, again, like Beverly said, you don't need to be a psychologist or a professional to be an ally to someone who's in the midst of a struggle. So that's great. Thank you, Beverly. And I know you have a wealth of resources available to people. So thank you. Another question that I will ask you from one of the members of the 17th floor that pertains to what we're speaking about. What programs or ideas would you recommend for an employer to support a caregiving employee? For example, a parent who is struggling with helping their children deal with mental illness.
There is so much that we could do around that. And I think, part of it is, first of all, recognizing the stress that they're going through. And are there ways of being able to support that person so that things are not maybe as stressful, or that, you're not adding other stressors on unnecessarily. And so do they need some flexibility? That might be a question that you can have a conversation. Do they, maybe things are more difficult with their caregiving and the routine in the first thing in the morning, maybe not so much in the later afternoon. So can their hours be adjusted to be able to account for that? It's about having that conversation of what is the hardest part about this, and how can we maybe problem solve around that in order to alleviate some of that stress. It's letting them know what they have access to in their benefits program. And so do they have access to caregivers? Do they have access to experts? Do they have access to resources that can help them take care of themselves, like massage and chiropractic and those types of things? So it's about making them aware of what's available. And then I think the last thing is, it's also about helping them to have other areas of their life that help to give them enjoyment and fun. And so sometimes we think the social activities at work are not, they're a waste of time, or they're the soft skills, or they're the add-ons. But in some cases, especially when we talk about caregiving, the ability to connect with people and have just a relaxed conversation, and not it being about having to get this one more thing done, or not about the caregiving situation, but just the ability to have fun for a little bit can allow them to let their hair down, to alleviate some of that stress for just a moment, to give them something else in their life. And then they need to go back and deal all those things. The other thing, so when we talk about programs, having training on how to build their resiliency, having somebody come in and talk about if they're dealing with elderly parents, what kind of decisions and how do you make those decisions, and what are some of the things to consider. So the more information and tools we can give people, the easier that caregiving process. The other thing that I saw that has been really helpful is setting up kind of mentor groups or support groups who are, people who are going through the same kind of thing, where they can talk about what did they learn or what was really useful to them. Those kinds of groups within larger workplaces can be really important as well.
Great to hear. It's interesting, that cathartic fun you talk about, that moment of distraction, knowing that there's still lots to deal with in the background at home or in your personal life, but just a moment of reprieve from that, and how important that is in managing and not just having that become one's whole identity. So thank you for sharing that. And yeah, it's a great question. So thank you, Catherine, for asking it. And I'll share another question from Denise. And Denise has asked, what is the best way to cultivate honest, open discourse between managers and employees? And I know you speak about a sense of belonging and why it is so crucial to mental health. So maybe in answering Denise's question, you can talk to us a little bit about this communication as well as this sense of belonging.
Yeah. One of the biggest programs that I'm doing right now, most requested, is around dealing with toxic behaviors in the workplace and dealing with negativity and difficult people. So it's not surprising that this came up as a question, because dealing with others is often one of our top sources of stress. And I think sometimes we get caught up in the we versus them, the us versus management, or union versus non-union, or whatever the us versus them. And that can drive a wedge, right? I think one of the things we need to look at when it comes to communication is really, how are we communicating? What are we trying to communicate? And what is the best way for us to be able to communicate that? So what's the goal of the communication? When we get together in our meetings, we talk about, we should always have an agenda. Well, what are the goals for these particular points? Is it information only? Is it we need a decision? Is it because we have a disagreement on this? So I think having a goal in mind is really important as well. I think addressing things as quickly as possible. We talk about it quickly, addressing coaching and counseling when we talk about the difficult, conversations. But I think it's really important when we're talking about any kind of discourse that we don't let it fester, that we don't let it kind of bubble under the surface, but we bring it to, bring attention to it. And we talk about, okay, it seems that we have a different opinion on this. Is it really significant that we have a difference of opinion? Because in some cases, it doesn't matter that we have a difference opinion on it. In some cases, it really does matter because we need to be on the same page in order to move forward. And so I think the biggest downfall is sometimes we think that we're aiming for the win-win, which I think is a really not a great place for us to be, because win-win means I've given up and you've given up something, and we don't have buy-in to the solution. And so what we're really looking for is what is the way to solve this? What is the right way to solve this in the best interest of those involved, whether that's our customer or, our team. But having that as the goal, as opposed to my way or your way, what's the right way? What's the way that we need to move forward on this? Because often what I see is when we've done a win-win is all of a sudden you and I are back into another disagreement. And all of a sudden, I'm bringing something that happened 3 years ago or 5 years ago or 10 years ago back into the conversation because I wasn't really happy with the way that it was solved in the first place. I think when it comes to teams, I'm spending a lot of time right now talking about workplace values. And we all have it, right? We have our mission, vision, and values. And the values, all of these things kind of sit on a wall somewhere collecting dust. But really, the values of the workplace are how we make decisions. It's our rules of engagement. And I'm seeing right now where not only does an organization need that, but a team really needs that. And those rules of engagement outline how are we going to get along with each other? How are we going to communicate with each other? What's really important to us? And how do we make those decisions, when they're difficult, when something's difficult? These are the values that we hold true to. Coming out of the pandemic, I think a lot of the toxicity and a lot of the negativity and difficulty is because the rules have changed. People have changed. What was really important for me may not be as important, or it may be even more important now that we've come out of the other side. And so I think as a team, we really need to talk about what are those rules of engagement as we move forward, so that when there is discourse, we know how we're going to handle that. We know that we have these guidelines for how we are going to be effective at managing that conflict.
It's setting these agendas is great and all, but having a goal of these agendas is equally as important as the agenda and the meetings, and not letting issues fester and addressing things quickly is also so important, and addressing them in a way where everyone's needs are met. So while that is easier said than done in many scenarios, it seems like you're alluding to it's so necessary to eliminate the future resentments that come up within an organization as a whole, but also the individual teams or subsets of that organization. Then having this adaptability, because people don't stay the same, they change. And so ensuring those rules of engagement and those guidelines are changing alongside the employees and the needs.
It's also, I think, important too that we know enough about our colleagues, the people on our team, to know how they respond in certain situations. So, do some people automatically get mad and then they listen? Do other people shut completely down and they kind of walk away? Or is somebody's first instinct to say no and then open up? When we know how each other responds and what's important to each other, it makes it easier to be able to have those more difficult conversations. Some people want to feel more in control. I do a program called Stop Letting That Difficult Person Ruin Your Day, where we talk about these 8 difficult characters and characteristics. And so, if somebody is wanting more control, well, how can you work with them in a way that gives them control, but it doesn't take all the power and control away from you? And so can you give them control by giving them options or giving them choice? Somebody might want more recognition. Can you boost somebody up, but still not blow smoke at them, or, not where they're doing the gotchas to other people? So there's all of these different ways of being able to understand what's important to that person. And that's where the values come in. And then being able to meet those needs, but in a way that is acceptable, in the way that the team functions.
Yeah, it's really to serve the greater purpose of everyone feeling like they're being supported and also having the team and the company function at its peak.
Mm-hmm.
So while you speak to that, we have a great question from Maureen that sort of speaks to the discourse, but also just being an employee in general and how we've had this ever-changing world pre, post COVID, however you want to put it. But it's always been important to just become a larger conversation now about the work-life balance. And Maureen asks, what is the best way to set and maintain boundaries at work?
First of all, know what boundaries you want to set, right? So, what's been encroaching and what is not comfortable, what's not helping you to be at your best, what's not allowing you to have the work-life balance that you want to look at. I don't really talk about work-life balance. I talk about work-life satisfaction. And so how satisfied are you with all of the different areas of your life? And when that satisfaction begins to wane, what's the cause of that? And so if it's because you don't have enough time or you're feeling guilty, how do you set those boundaries? And so for some people, it's, I don't start work before 8:00, or I don't answer messages after 6:00, or I don't take my phone with me on vacation, or I don't answer my work messages on vacation. Whatever those boundaries are, you have to know what ones you want to set, but it's also having that discussion within the team, like what's going to work. Again, it goes back to those values again that we talked about, those rules of engagement. If we say that the mental health of our employees is really important, yet we are bombarding them with message after message and request after request while they're supposed to be on that 1-week vacation, then that's not saying that their mental health is important, because we know that they need that time off in order to rejuvenate and to relax and to come back feeling refreshed. And so if that's important, what are the decisions that we're making that are going to help allow that person to be able to take that vacation? So what's the conversation that needs to happen? When is it an emergency? When do we need to really check in with that person? Who else can answer those questions, and how are we setting that up? I think the big part, though, is being able to vocalize and verbalize what you would like those boundaries to look like, and then being able to negotiate those within the team. I mean, you may say, I don't answer any messages after 3:00, but you're an international company with, across all kinds of time zones, that may not work. But what would work instead? And so you need to be able to negotiate them within your team.
Yeah. And I love that you've put it as work-life satisfaction instead of work-life balance, or not instead of in conjunction with, and having this solution posed of actions aligning with a company's set values and doing as you say and saying as you do. It's important to have that consistency for people to feel like their needs are being met and aligning with the company themselves. So that's great.
I think balance tends to, we tend to go to the vision or the picture of it being equal. And so it's not about equal. And everybody's balance is going to look very different. When I'm traveling, people will say, oh, your life is so out of balance. No, it's exactly the balance I want it to be, because when I'm home and when I was with my kids and taking them to hockey, that was where I was at that particular time. So am I doing the things that I want to do in the way that I want to do them with the energy that I need in order to be able to do them? I think those are some of the measurements that come from that as well. Do I have the energy to spend my time and my, my capabilities, my talents at the things that are going to bring me joy and satisfaction, without feeling so drained and behind the 8 ball that I can't even get up off the couch at the end of the day because I just have nothing left to give.
Mm-hmm. And conserving that energy, really important to be able to do as many things as you want to commit to that are feasible.
And knowing when to commit to those, because I can do it all, but I can't do it all at the same time. And so your balance is going to change. That's where you spend your time and energy and your priorities is going to change. It may change quarter to quarter, depending on the projects that you have. It may change week by week. It may change year over year. It may change decade by decade. Who we are in our 20s is not going to be who we are in our 50s or in our 60s. And so balance is always evolving. And that satisfaction is always about adjusting to make it exactly what we need it to be at this particular time. And I go back to, circle back to what I talked about earlier. Resiliency is about living that full and flourishing life. That's really what we talk about when we talk about that work-life satisfaction.
Yeah, and that resiliency and that adaptability that you speak to as well. So, so important. It's an incredible insight. Thank you, Beverly. I have another great question from Caitlin, kind of on this similar topic of managing, and how do you manage stress at work, and how do you manage a heavy workload? What are some ideas that leadership support can give?
When we look at the issue of burnout, one of the top contributors to burnout right now is workload sustainability. And so it is a big topic right now, because I think what's happened, if we kind of take the pandemic as an example, workloads were already high, and people were sometimes doing the job of 2 people or 3 people because, people had left or retired or in transition. But then the pandemic hit, and everybody buckled down to try to make it work, just to try to get through, to adapt to working from home, to adapt to working in a hybrid team. All of the challenges with supply chain, like all of these things kind of impacted the person. And so we worked really, really hard to make it work. The problem is we can't sustain that pace or that intensity over a long period of time. It's very similar to when a new parent brings home a newborn, and you can stay awake for a couple of days, a couple of weeks. You can work on very, very little sleep as a new parent, but you can't do that, when they're 5, 10, 15, 21 years old. Eventually you burn out. And that's what we're seeing in the workplace right now. And so I think as a leader, it's really important that we sit down and we talk about what is realistic. Maybe you've been doing the job of 2 or 3 people. That's not realistic. Maybe you've done it and it's been done, so that almost becomes the norm, but that shouldn't be the norm. We should never be working at 100% capacity, because then if there's an emergency or there's a big conflict or challenge, we have nothing left to give to that, or we have no way of being flexible or adaptable if we're already at 100%. Nothing drives me more crazy than when I see give it 110%. You should never, like that. First of all, you can't, but you should never be working at that kind of pace, because you're going to burn out. And so what is reasonable? Is it 85%, or is it 90%? Is it 75%? What is reasonable in order for us to be able to adapt, but also in order for us to be able to be creative and collaborative, and to be, I talk about creativity, and I'm sure many of you can relate. It's just as you fall asleep, you come up with these great kind of solutions to things, or when you're sitting in the shower, sitting or standing in the shower, all of a sudden these great ideas come because the pace is slowed down, and you've been able to problem solve, or you've been able to allow the creativity to bubble to the surface. Same thing needs to happen within our organizations. If our companies are really going to rely on the brain power of our people, we can't be taxing them at 100%.
So that 100 or 110% doesn't allow for this slowed pace for a few minutes to have when you have in the shower, and when you're about to go to bed, and when things have slowed down, to really just think and come up with some stuff that you might not be able to come up with when you're going at this 100, 110 pace. And it's just, it's so unsustainable. And that adrenaline only lasts for so long. And so great insight. Burnout.
And we see people burning out, right? We know that our rates of burnout are about 15% higher than they were prior to the pandemic. And more and more people are talking about it. And we're saying, well, the pandemic's over. People should be getting back to normal. People are tapped out. There's nothing left in the reserves. And so they got through the emergency, but now they're just nothing left to give. And so we really need to talk about, what does it mean to have a supportive group around us? Because going back to what you mentioned earlier, that support network is hugely important. What does it mean to have a pace where I can keep up, but I can also bring the best of myself, and I can be collaborative, and I can be creative, and I can, we can come up with like the best way to handle solutions. Going back to when we talked about, dealing with difficulty or conflict, we can't problem solve it if we're so pressured under time that we just have to move on to the next thing. And that's why things boil and boil and bubble and bubble. And all of a sudden there's these explosions that happen because we haven't had the time to be able to address them appropriately.
Mm-hmm. So that rest and rejuvenation is so, so important to try and eliminate burnout as much as possible or get ahead of it.
Mm-hmm.
So to do a little pivot here, in many of your workshops, you've spoken about the concept of hope and that many companies don't necessarily see hope as a necessity or a business strategy for employee well-being. Can you share with us a little bit about why hope is so essential for employee well-being and why it is in fact a business strategy?
It is absolutely a business strategy, despite all of the posters that you have that say hope is not a strategy. But I'm not talking about whimsical hope. I'm talking about strategic hope. Whimsical hope is like when you blow the candles out on your birthday cake and you wish for rainbows and unicorns. It's kind of that airy fairy kind of thinking. But strategic hope is what allows us to be able to step forward. I think the sad part is that many people have lost their sense of hope, and that's why we're seeing so much despair right now. But hope is what allows us to be able to move forward. And so when I talk about strategic hope, hope has kind of three parts to it. When we talk about strategic hope, hope has a sense of direction. Where are we going? So as a leader, you need to be the beacon of hope, right? You need to be that person who's showing the way of where we're stepping forward to. What is it that we are driving towards? Hope needs energy. And so that's why it's so important that we take care of ourselves, because when we are worn out, when we're tired out, when we're burned out, we can't spark that flame of hope. We have nothing to give to getting to that direction. There's just no way that we can go there. And so it has to have not only the energy, but it also needs to have flexibility and adaptability. And that's the third part. It's, hey, we know it's not going to be easy. We know this is where we're going, but we know that there's going to be lots of things thrown into our path. And so strategic hope is what allows us to be flexible, to go, hey, I don't know how we're going to get there, but I'm going to get there, right? Or as a team, we don't maybe have all the steps in place, but we know that we have the right people in place to be able to problem solve this and to get there. And so a leader is that shining beacon that says, we have the right people. I know that this is where we're going. And the leader is making sure that people take care of themselves, so that they're not burned out, tired out, worn out, frustrated, so that they can't step forward into the challenges that they're facing. So for me, hope is absolutely a part of who we need to be. And as a leader, what we need to be actively engaged in order to help our teams to be resilient, to take care of their mental health, to be able to engage in all of the changes and challenges that we're going to be facing.
It's definitely not whimsical hope, what you are describing. It's
work.
Yeah.
It takes
really
work.
Yeah.
It takes work to figure out what the strategy is going to be. It takes work to maintain that energy. It takes work to problem solve when the way is being blocked. But so it's not this thing that just happens. You can't just have hope. You have to work on hope. Hope is what allows me to create the strategy to be able to move forward.
Cultivating that hope. Yeah. And strategic is a word that is often used in business. So it's really great that you've added it to hope and made it a package deal, because they sound like they go beautifully together when put like that.
Yeah.
Thank you. So mental health in the workplace and mental health in general is such a huge topic, and it can feel so isolating. Is there any insight you can provide to instill hope for those struggling or stuck in a rut?
Anybody who's struggling with their mental health right now, first of all, know that you're not alone. Many people are struggling, and it's not by any necessarily fault of your own. It's not by a personal weakness. Most people would never choose to feel this way, right? And so understanding that there are things that can be done, but even if you've tried them and they're not working, that doesn't make it your fault. I look at something like depression. 1 out of 10 people is going to experience depression at some point in their lifetime. So if we have about, I'm going to round numbers to make my math really easy, but if we have about 30 million Canadians, if we look at 1 in 10, 10 million Canadians, or sorry, my math isn't good. 3 million Canadians are going to experience depression at some point. We know that only 1 out of every 3 people seeks help. So there's going to be about 2 million Canadians who are not reaching out for help because of the shame and the stigma that we talked about. But I think when we put it into numbers, this is not 1 or 2 people. This is millions of people who are dealing with these issues. But also to know that there are very many different types of treatment options, if you want to say, or support options. Sometimes it is about taking medication. Sometimes it is about going to see a psychologist or a psychotherapist or a therapist. Sometimes it's learning about what tools can you put in your tool belt that can help you deal with some of those difficult situations that you might find yourself in. Learning how to have a better rhythm to life, where you deal with a stressful situation and you come back down, you deal with the next stressful situation and come back down. What are those strategies that you can use to manage that energy? And so there's so many different ways, and how I might experience it, like I said earlier, may be very different than how you're going to experience it. And what treatment options work for me may be very different than the treatment options that work for you. I think there's nothing that drives me crazier than when I see books that say, if you do yoga every day, it will, you too will have your depression lifted. Well, yeah, maybe that would be the right strategy for you, but maybe that'll make it actually worse because you'll feel guilty because you don't like yoga, and yoga it takes too much, concentration, and you don't have the skills to do it. So knowing that there are many options, and knowing, I go back to being that supportive person, helping people to realize that there's more than one way of being able to manage it. And if something that they've tried hasn't worked, let them know that there's other things that they can try. And if that therapist was not the right therapist for them, it's not that they can't be helped. It's that person was the wrong person for them. And so there may be somebody else who they connect better with, who can ask questions in a different way, where there just seems to be a synergy that allows them to be able to move forward. As a support person, helping and encouraging people when they are having trouble figuring things out on their own. That's what we can do. So being aware of what supports are available in your community, what supports are available in your company, what things has the person tried? Maybe there's other things that you can suggest. It's never about diagnosing, the illness. It's never about, recommending, hey, this is absolutely what they should do, but it's opening up the possibility that there's more than one way, and that there's people there to help them. So whether it's, referring them to their EAP or their HR or their doctor, that's how we can be that supportive person for them.
Thank you, Beverly. As you said, there's no one way someone experiences depression, for example. So there would be no one way that people are treated for it. And that idea of this should work can lead to a further feeling of isolation, because if it doesn't, what's wrong with me that no one else has? So some great insight. Thank you so much. So unfortunately, as much as I would love to sit and chat with you, our time is coming to an end together for this webinar. So I will say, if anyone out there is struggling with mental health in the workplace or elsewhere, please reach out for help. And we hope you'll continue this conversation, this super important conversation, by utilizing some of the resources that Beverly has spoken about, the 17th Floor Forum, to ask further questions and engage with your peers, and also to reach out to Beverly directly. If you are watching this webinar that is recorded on a replay, her contact information is below. And thank you so, so much, Beverly. This has been incredible, and I'm so grateful that you have joined us and all the insight that you've shared.
Thank you. And thank you for those that sent in such wonderful questions. Like, this is a huge, huge topic, and we could have done this for hours. And so I appreciate that, we're on a bit of a time budget, but certainly there's lots of information on the website, under the articles, under the blog section. You can reach out to me, and follow me on social media, on LinkedIn, because I do post a lot of information on mental health and resiliency. And so you can comment on it or take it and adapt it for your team.
And I can attest to that. Since I started following all of your social media channels, I have gained so much, and I've gained so much personally from hearing you today and learning your answers to a lot of these really, really tough and pertinent questions. So thank you. And thank you to all of our members who have tuned in, and our viewers and participants for the questions. We hope to see you all again very soon to continue this very crucial conversation and many others. And With that, I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and thank you so much, everyone.
Bye, everybody.